In German, right?
Yeah.
Herzlich willkommen zu 99 zu 1. My name is Nadim. Welcome to 99 zu 1. And today we have Wael with us. Wael, I got a hold of you basically through a message from my wife. She sent me one of your videos where you were commenting one of these protests here in Germany. I think you are in Berlin, especially. You are accompanying a lot of the protests that are protesting against the war and Israel's war in Gaza. And I found that quite interesting. And as you are also, you're accompanying so many demos, I thought let's get you here and talk a little bit about what your impressions are and your learnings from all of this. Maybe a couple of words to yourself. Maybe I'll ask you first who you are so that you also introduce yourself a bit to the audience. Tell us something about yourself. Where are you from? How did you get here? What are you doing here?
Yeah, I'm Wael Eskander. I'm many things, but one of the things is I'm a journalist from Cairo. I covered the Egyptian revolution for a very, very long time, and I kind of wrote a lot about it. But the revolution started in 2011. By 2016, it was completely defeated, I would say. And a lot of people that I knew went to jail, and it was very, very stressful. So I needed to get out. So I stepped out and found a way to come to Berlin. I had a lot of friends here. They said Berlin is a great city. Come visit. It's relaxed. It's your kind of city.
Yeah, 2015 to 16. That's how one spoke back then about Berlin.
Yes.
One can't imagine today.
Yeah, it's a kind of like a broken dream, like a broken promise. I mean, let's say. Yeah. But it was great when I visited, and I met a lot of people. And I arrived in summer. This is how you like Berlin, and then you go through winter. But yeah, I disengaged a little bit from journalism and worked a little bit on technology, open source investigations, digital safety trainings, and, like kind of an intersection between technology and society, which is my primary interest, society, that is. So yeah, all of this happened until, Berlin dragged me back into politics, which is something I was trying to take a break from by coming here.
Okay. And you were, when you were in Egypt, and were you already covering the revolution in the sense of that you were already active as a journalist back then, or were you just taking part in the political activities there?
No, I was I was active. I was active in the revolution in multiple ways. But I started out my journalism career as an art critic, film critic, and then I joined actually just before the revolution. The biggest state-owned paper in Egypt, it was called Ahram. They had an English section called Ahram Online. It was run by an independent editor, Hani Shukrallah. He was amazing. And you'd find the state paper writing something and the online English version having proper journalism. And that was kind of like a starting point for me to go into politics from there. So actually, the revolution broke out while I was working for that outlet, and the editor got us together and said, hey, it's great that people are going out there, but we have the opportunity to report on this thing and amplify the voices of people there. And yeah, that's how I got a little bit more into the political aspect of writing. And then, from then on, covered a lot of events, covered a lot of protests, and yeah, just kept writing until I couldn't. Like the last paper in Egypt, the last local paper in Egypt that I was writing for, was just like taken over by the government. Yeah, they just wanted to silence all the voices and so on. And that's kind of why, and Egypt went out of, interest, because already like there was a lot of catering to the new dictator and trying to get like the arms deals and all of that. So that's how I kind of like stopped a little bit.
And going back to the times when you started this during the revolution, back then, fair to say, I think it's also said like this here in Europe, Egypt was basically a dictatorship under Hosni Mubarak. How was that like? Because what we're going to talk now also, it's about the repression here in Germany. We are in a very democratic democracy, super democratic, hyper democratic. How was it like there when you are, at least, I mean, maybe you were not the dissident voice yourself, maybe you were, I don't know, but at least you were amplifying those, right? And you were covering it. So how was that like in terms of repression against your position? How scared were you? Were you assaulted when you went to any of these protests or stuff like that?
Yeah, Egypt. Okay, well, Egypt under Mubarak was a dictatorship. Today, it's like a dictatorship on steroids.
Even
so
more, yeah.
I'll talk about the Mubarak era, where I think there are a lot more parallels under the Mubarak dictatorships than I'm seeing here. But back then, all the state controlled, coerced people into following suit. That was the thing. Journalism was a very precarious job. It was unrewarding. You had a lot of state-sponsored journalists who spread all of the propaganda, and the independent journalists were, very rare, but also quite targeted and called in and questioned and suppressed in so many ways. Actually, just before, like on the 24th of January, no one would have expected this kind of explosion. There was a lot of dissent, obviously, because one thing about Egypt is it was a dictatorship, it was oppressive, but people knew that it was. There was this kind of awareness that it was there. They never pretended it was a real democracy. Everyone knew it was a sham. And so the dissent was real and very widespread, and any person with some kind of like integrity can see the problem with it. So I would say
that's why it could also ignite at such a scale in such a short time, right? So everybody would just connect without even having, I mean, there was organizing that happened and a lot of years of preparation for this, but in the end, like millions of people in Tahrir Square, and like this is something that there needs to be a widespread appreciation of what's happening there in that country before that, right?
Yeah, it was actually it was because people were so disgruntled and they were looking for an opportunity. I would say that we can go into a lot of organizing, but eventually there was one factor that brought in the middle class to be really upset with the regime, and particularly the young people. It was the murder of a middle class man called Khaled Said. I think he was 28, 29, something like that. And the death was, the murder was so horrific, and the state did not want any accountability. And that really created the critical mass where when a spark happened, even the middle class joined. And so with all of their influence and ability to affect media and speak and so on, I mean, that was something that that was a critical mass that we reached, and yeah, and exploded then from then on. And actually, it wasn't just 18 days; it was, kind of like 2 years, maybe even more than that, of organizing on the street and people doing various things and resisting in various ways. So it was a lot bigger than that.
So here you are, you take part in that revolution, then you go through basically the counter revolution. You are in the regime of al-Sisi, who is actually like a dictator again, and it's even worse, like you said. And now you come to Germany, and you start, at some point, you start to getting politically active again. Why is that? What was your gateway to this again?
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny because here was a time for break, and I just actually wanted to stop engaging for a while to rest and so on. But it all happened in 2022. Nakba Day demo was banned. But one of my friends, passed by. We were just going to, it was in Hermannplatz, and we were going to Hasenheide. Along the way, there were people there.
Sure.
I was holding my bike, passing through, and we got kettled by the police. They didn't ask us to leave. They just detained us for around 2 hours. And then I was like, it was preposterous for me. I was like, okay,
what's happening?
Like, I have my bike in hand. You're telling other people to leave. Okay. White people, obviously. So there was no indication. So it felt to me that there was something of a targeting, and it got me really, really angry.
You felt racially targeted, basically.
Oh yes,
Yes.
yes, yes. I mean, the people that were detained there were all had a similar profile. Of course, there were some people that we knew that were there already, but the idea was just like it wasn't even, there was no intent to protest, for me at least.
Yes.
And I still got targeted, and nothing I said could change it. And the moment that I realized that they were just following orders rather than speaking to us is the minute I realized, okay, wait, I can draw a parallel with Egypt and the kettling that happened in 2010 about the Khalid Said murder, and actually wrote a piece called "Ice Cream with Police" in Berlin, and it described like they were saying, "Hey, you're not detained or anything," and they allowed me to get ice cream while I was there. One of my friends, she was there, but also like saying, "Hey, I'm German, you can't do this is my rights," and so on. They were not hearing it. So I asked her if she wanted ice cream with me. She said, "Yeah, get me one scoop of this and one scoop of that." And then the police officer shouted, "No, only one scoop."
You're kidding.
It's ridiculous. It's so crazy. I mean, I just didn't understand how you're allowed to have one scoop but not two. And so, yeah, I wrote about that. And I found it ridiculous, but I also laughed about it. And I was talking to the police. This is one of the opportunities where I could talk to policemen. In Egypt, you can't.
Yes,
Like,
yes, of course. Yeah.
so I was using that opportunity to speak to the policeman and ask them, "Hey, are you racially profiling?" And they said, "No, of course not." But they were getting orders. They told us we're not going to be charged. We're going to be ID'd. But then we got charged. And so, yeah, I got really, really...
What did you get charged with?
Participating in a banned protest.
Just because you walked there, basically.
Yeah, I mean, they had no evidence.
And that was 2022. That was before the October 7th.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. So, okay. And that's how you became active again. You started writing about this and maybe noticing that something is odd about Israel and Palestine here in Germany.
No, but I knew that from before.
I
knew that from before.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to engage with it. I thought, well, maybe if people are having their memory culture, I didn't understand it. So I just thought it was crazy, but I didn't understand how crazy it was until, of course, people were telling me a lot of tales. Like I heard about people being fired for speaking out. I heard about the suppression of Palestinian voices. Of course, there's like, I think 7 or 8 people who were fired from Deutsche Welle. And of course, the complete suppression of voices everywhere. That was already evident from before.
Yes, yes.
But October 2023 is just a different thing altogether.
Okay, so is it like more a continuation of what you saw before, or has something changed qualitatively? What do you think? Like after the 7th of October, what changed?
No, I think...
Or what did you experience there in
Yeah.
the wake of that and these demos that you cover?
Something changed. I saw more and more of Egypt in Berlin. That was a fundamental change in how they operated. More and more. I don't know if it was always there. Probably it was. But the intensity of protests post October 2023 highlighted this more. And I think also changed the behavior a lot more. They were like I think leading up to just a few days ago, there is kind of like certainty from the police that there would be no accountability. But I would say it happened gradually. I mean, the first time I was able to join a protest in 2023 was the Global South United protest. And I'd heard already what happened in Potsdamer and Neukölln, and it was very, very scary tales from people who had been there. And when I joined, people writing the lawyers' names on their arms and ready to be hurt, beaten, and so on. And for me, that was very reminiscent of how scared I was when I went to the protests in Egypt. I wasn't one of those brave people that went to all the protests and was like, yeah, no, I was really scared all the time because it was extremely violent. You never knew what could happen. The first protest, I mean, I didn't know. I mean, it's also very weird for me that the police is walking next to you so close. It's usually in Egypt, you have lines and there's a confrontation. But this proximity that they can kind of grab you whenever they want, control you, that for me was it took a little getting used to.
Okay. So You said that it changed. So maybe tell us some of your observations. Like, how did it change? What got worse? They got stronger? You said, or maybe their repression intensified. Maybe you can tell us also about your last visit, because you also reported on this. When the police here in Berlin obviously went again quite haywire, also against you this time. Tell us something about, like, especially the people, because we are now having an English podcast, the people that are not in Germany. How is protesting for Palestine like now in Germany and in Berlin especially?
Yeah, I mean, since the start, there was always this repression of these protests in one way or another. So they would end the demo, they would make up rules along the way. At first, it wasn't so intense. They would make excuses to arrest people, but the brutality increased over time. I mean, there were a lot of children that were arrested, like in the very, but I mean, even in the first few days, there were minors that were brutally arrested. And I thought that was like kind of a red line, but apparently it kept happening. I would say that over time, most of the protests have had excuses from the police to go in and brutalize people and arrest them. And I think it was very targeted. But what I've been seeing more is the close cooperation between media and the police. And in terms of, if German people had a chance of knowing what was really happening in Gaza and what was happening in Berlin, German media completely killed that over the years, systematically, by defaming the protest, misrepresenting what was happening, actually ignoring a lot of Jewish people showing up to these protests. It's not reported on in the mainstream media, even though they're extremely visible every time you go to a protest.
And also not seldomly brutalized themselves. So.
Oh yes, they're targets of the same kind of attacks on anyone pro-Palestinian. The interesting thing about the movement in Berlin is that it's international. So it has a lot of Palestinians, yes, but it has a lot of people from all over the world with their experiences. And so basically all of the people come together, but they're all, because they're protesting what they think is genocide, the German state is repressing them because of the idea. And that for me is like kind of like a huge infringement on civil liberties. And, you know, yeah, I would say it's like, I could go into the last protest because that's kind of like the epitome of where we're at with policing in the state. So the last protest was restricted to be a stationary rally instead of moving.
It's traditionally a march that goes along Karl-Marx-Straße, Hasenheide, or Hermannstraße, or something like this, where people walk. And this time it was basically forbidden. From Südstern on, they were supposed to walk to Hermannplatz, I think. And it was forbidden, and they were supposed to stay stationary.
Yes. The very interesting thing about that, I don't know if that's an important detail, but that was challenged in court. And the lawyers won, and they made it a moving march.
Right.
And the very last minute, the police appealed to the Supreme Administrative Court, and then they made it stationary again.
What was the argument? Why was it to be stationary? Was there any argument?
The argument was that it was too dangerous to control. It's always the public order, public safety,
yeah, security.
I mean, you know, believe it or not, this is the repressive regime's guidebook. We've seen this a lot in Egypt on how these kind of excuses are used. Things that you cannot, it's up to interpretation, that you cannot really prove. So it's really a political decision by I would say it's a political decision by the administrative court. And for me, that is extremely worrying. When the courts start to be political, that's the start of the decline, really. So as a stationary rally, they got in, I think, units that are trained in the violent interaction with protesters. Yeah. They escalated very quickly. And what I noticed, the most important thing about what I noticed, is that the whole block was dehumanized. The police did not talk to people. And that's why even journalists with with press cards and clearly identified, or they're just shoved around. And I think someone got their camera attacked. I was pushed over like 3 times, and it was just some of the most injuries within a stationary position, where the police had the full control and just going to the crowds. And I'm like wondering, what do they think protests are for? Like, we're not supposed to have a protest if you claim to be you're in a democratic country, a protest that is just like besieged by the police. Like, what's the point of that? And it makes sense in Egypt, but if you claim that you're different to Egypt, then why is there such strong police presence to control it?
So what would be the pretext of them going in, for example, getting someone? Like, what are they looking for? Is it like is it random, or do they actually react to a certain slogan, or I don't know, is there some Islamist there that says something anti-Semitic or something like this? What is it that they get triggered on? Why do they go inside and rough up people? And then, of course, it becomes a chain reaction, and they rough up more because there's resistance, etc.
Yeah, I mean, they have very, very, very specific things that they use as excuses. One of the things that they have is a slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." So they deem that. I mean, they've deemed that as illegal, even though there's no court decision to back this up. But the police decides and then acts on it, on the instructions. Or red triangles. That's one of the other things that they have an issue with. They say it's a Hamas symbol. The history of the triangle is a lot funnier and older and so on. But they deem it that. And, there's no like solid legal grounds, but they have all of these other things. Like if you mask up, they can go after you. But in the last demo, for example, there were 3 journalists like covering the whole thing that got on top of a car. So they got a permission from the owner of the car, and they were on top of it, and they had an excellent view, and they can document like how the police works. But the police just went in, charged, and arrested the journalist, and not just cited them for, that was actually very near this, like probable damage to private property. But in order to hinder them from doing their job, they also didn't just book them and leave them, which they could do and should do. No, they took them to a detention facility. They searched them 3 times, took their photos, and actually kind of really disproportionately dealt with the situation. They could have just told them, "Come down." This, in the case of journalists. But for protesters, well, just any sign. In the past, there's like, okay, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. They deem it as genocidal. I don't know why. They think it's to destroy every Israeli. That's their interpretation. That's their sick interpretation. But at some point in one of the protests, someone had this sign that says, "From the river to the sea, we demand equality." They were arrested.
Even that doesn't work.
Yeah. They could just make it up. I mean, if they think that any sign, oh, wait, must have violated, they just go in. They can sometimes beat people, sometimes they don't, but mostly they do. So it's a pretext for violence, and every time they beat someone, this is a common police tactic, and I think people in Germany would know, but maybe people outside don't. If they beat up someone, even for no reason, they give them resisting police measures, Widerstand. That way, and the reason they do this is because if someone sues them, there's a video, they countersue that person, and usually the police win, because in the German courts, they usually hold the testimony of a policeman higher than a civilian. Also unclear to me why.
What do you think is what's the purpose of it? Like, why are they doing this? Because ultimately, I mean, they could also just, let these protests happen. Why are they so worried about roughing them up all the time? Clearly, they see that after 2 years of repression, what they don't succeed in is making them dissipate. They still happen. People still go to these. So it's not about, or maybe it is still about, but it should not be about, making them disappear. So what is it about? Why are they doing this?
There were several layers to this. I think on some level, and a lot of studies have been taking place, even from the Ministry of Interior, show that the police are inherently racist, and the way they deal with things is racist. I don't attribute this violence to that part of it, although that part escalated. But I think these, at least I could talk about Berlin, these policemen are following instructions, orders. So I wouldn't particularly take it up with the police, even though they have their own motivations. I would take it up with the Berlin Senat and the mayor, who have very openly announced their opposition to any criticism of Israel. And this is crazy to me, because unconditional support of Israel, what if the condition is genocide? And actually they're proving it is unconditional, because most genocide scholars agree that it's genocide. Amnesty, all of them,
human rights NGOs,
everyone sees it. And also we have eyes, and we see, and we can determine based on that. But there is an ideological opposition to protesting the genocide, and that's why it's very violent. And it's sort of to deter people from going. It's also to pursue them and make their life expensive. Now, what a lot of people don't get is that jail is not the only way to silence people, but taking away their livelihood in some way or another, canceling them, getting them fired from the job, getting them caught up in courts, all of this contributes to taking away people's ability to mobilize and convince and resist. So I think it's mostly to kind of like end the voices that are able to speak out, particularly that around 70% of Germans anyway think that Israel is going too far.
Right, but stay silent.
They stay silent. And that's what they're afraid of, is
Exactly.
that the 70% are activated by the bravery of those who are able to speak out.
Do you think that's a special thing in Berlin? Have you like, surely you have contacts to other cities, maybe you have visited protests somewhere else? Like, do you think that's the same everywhere, or is this like a special case for Berlin's government?
Berlin is particularly violent. Berlin is particularly violent, and I think there are two reasons for that. First is the largest Palestinian diaspora is in Berlin anyway.
Sure.
The numbers are bigger in Berlin, but also a vested interest from Kai Wegner,
right,
to have this as like the mayor of Berlin, to have this as his crusade. So it just manifests itself that way. I mean, if you have the same kind of a movement in other places, who knows? Yes, but I think in Berlin it's been particularly intolerant of any kind of movement. So
you like because that's also what I saw. I looked at some videos from demos in, I don't know, Bremen or Munich or something like this. And while the police would still be obnoxious and would still, go in and arrest this or that person, the amount of violence and really like the fired upness, let's say, of the cops, like it really looks like they go in there because they want to beat people up. So, and you've been until now, you've been like talking quite favorably of the cops and putting, rightly so, I think. No, I'm sorry, no, I'm not saying no, not favorably in this sense. I'm just saying that you are, when you ask yourself about why it is like this, you're rightly so looking at the politics that are standing behind it. But then I want to talk quickly about these cops themselves, because for example, what I saw now, there was this guy that supposedly got severely injured at the protest, right? Well, there are videos now, and actually I have some people that also just told me that before I got here, that this guy actually went into the crowd and started beating people up so violently that from hitting one person in the head, he broke his fist. His hand was broken from that hit. And after one of these hits that he threw, he fell. And when he fell, people got on him, and then more injuries apparently occurred or something like this. That's how I got it. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But when you look at this video, you can see this guy is like really like he's wild. Like he's going in there to destroy people, basically. That's how I go when I fight, mm-hmm. Like in a competition or something. Then I'm like, okay, I want to kill you. So is that what you feel from them? Or because you have also said that, sometimes you can speak to them, they're also close to you. Like, do you feel like they sometimes maybe even have their own inhibitions where they say, man, I don't think we should be that violent, but we kind of have to? Like, what is your impression of their space?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I like doing, even, people don't like it, I like speaking to cops when I can to get an insight into that. My impression, I'll get into that a little bit more. My impression is that cops come in different shapes and sizes. There are cops that don't want to do this. There are cops whose role is not to do this. There are cops that are using this opportunity, and I've seen this happen a lot. It just takes one cop to go crazy and want to beat people for all the other cops to protect them.
Of course, and join in and then defend yourself against resistance, and then it boils up on its own.
Yeah, and like, one of the videos I captured is a really intense video, and I did it like in a slow motion kind of way, hoping to really get the deliberateness of it. Is a Jewish protesters, clearly with a kippah, telling the cop, "I'm Jewish," and the cop just smashing his face and saying, "But I'm Jewish. Are you doing this?" And he does it again. The cop next to him is so embarrassed, but they have these instructions never to talk to the cop next to them. So he goes out to the crowd and says, no, calm down. His colleague just beat up someone for no reason, and they're not allowed to do that. And I think that this is why I think that, yeah, cops have to act violently as part of their job if their instruction is to protect each other rather than to uphold the law or so on. So I would say it's and it just takes one cop to get away with things. That's why there's an escalation. Cops are not held accountable no matter what they do. Beating people in custody, that's kind of like if you have on tape a cop beating someone in custody and they get off, why shouldn't all the violent, hateful cops do the same? It's kind of like a carte blanche.
Then, I mean, what's interesting with you is you have like this experience from Egypt. You come here, you have an experience in Germany, dictatorship versus democracy. A lot of parallels when it comes to dealing with the police. Maybe not completely the same, but a lot of things that remind you of your old times, let's say. Yeah. What is it then that you have learned of the role of the police? Maybe in these protests, maybe in Germany, or maybe in general. Like, what are the police actually doing? What's their role in the society?
Yeah, I mean, there is this advertised role that sells people on what the police is, upholding the law,
security, safety,
all of that,
protecting people.
Yeah, I don't actually believe that to be true. I think that's a way to kind of bring balance to society or balance to power. But I fall back to Tolstoy's political writings on this. And, if ever since the 1800s, he saw the military and the security as a way of upholding, the power of those in power, executing the will of those in power. And it's no different. I think where people get confused is when there is no vested interest in power, the police can act in a certain way that is not harmful in particular. But in general, when push comes to shove, and it's the interests of the ruling elite or the ruling parties, the police always acts as their whip and the enforcer, even if this enforcement is unjust or even if this enforcement is contrary to the law. So I think the police more and more for Palestine, for Palestine's context, has shown this being an instrument of repression of the state, an instrument of violence. And, in the modern state, we believe that there is a monopoly on violence for the state enacted by the police. And what people don't talk about is the condition for this monopoly on violence. The condition is justice. And once that condition is broken, then that violence itself is illegitimate. And I think we've seen a lot of illegitimate violence from the state. And this is why this is going to breed violence from people. And I would say a lot of the violence from people is legitimate, because at the end of the day, the balance of power, if we really believe in this idea of justice, should be that injustice is not perpetrated. So that's how I'm seeing the police. And one incident around the police that really reminds me of Egypt is how the venues were threatened to be shut down for the Francesca Albanese talk.
Yes.
They said they threatened the Cool House, Boom, and Junge Welt with permanent closure if they host an event. And I mean, a lot of people talk about the violence on the street as evidence of the police state. But for me, this kind of abuse of power, political power, is what makes a police state. And I see a police state in these kind of coercions, in the kind of like things like university professors given the instructions not to talk to students in the context of Palestine, but to call the police immediately. Now, the difference between Egypt and Germany in this is that in Egypt, we know that the police on campus is repressive, and some people support it, but they don't think it's a democracy.
Yeah, the ideology of that being like a democracy or something, nobody believes it.
No one believes it.
Here, people are convinced of that. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have police on campus all the time. Professors instructed to call the police on students. For me, this is like really crazy. But when the police acts in, he steps in and acts in place of what is supposed to be political instead of debate, this is when people are ruled by violence and threat of violence, not ruled by consensus. And this is what I'm seeing here. The repression means there's no consensus, but the police is used to enforce a political will.
Okay. 2 more questions. Let's jump from here to, or let's stay with those protests again. One question I have there, because one thing that many times you will hear from users and people that watch this show or watch your reports or read your reports is that when they see a video, for example, like this cop going wild on the protesters, they will say, "Ah, yeah, they must have done something." So, and then there is like this this branch of people that say, "Yeah, it's true. Maybe the police is overreaching. Maybe the police is not staying within their boundaries of legality, etc." But also, the protests need to reflect and criticize themselves. Now, you've been at these protests. From that perspective, can you like maybe tell us a little bit? Like, have you seen things that that you would say, yeah, they are problematic, and I actually understand why even democratic state with its police would intervene into this? Like, is that happening, or are you saying no? Actually, I don't really see any problem from the protesters' side. There isn't really nothing they could do to vocate this dissent that they have without getting repressed. Like, how do you see that? Is there a way to navigate this without getting beaten up?
I don't think it's up to the protesters, to be honest. From my experience, the violence is almost always instigated by the police under the guise of whatever, a chant they don't like, a sign they don't like. It's almost like they have a quota. I don't know the internal workings, but it seems that way because they are looking for excuses. And I've been to other protests where if it's not Palestine, everything goes smoothly.
Sure.
And I would say that even on the 1st of May, it was the same. They just let him be, and nothing happened.
Yeah, or some right-wing demos also many times pretty peaceful.
Yeah, it's a political decision to attack them.
Right. That's
my opinion based on my observation. I also need to point out the nature of these protests. Like I said, it's international. There are a lot of Jewish people there, a lot of queer people. It's kind of like an open. Not that there's anything wrong with having like a Muslim-based protest. I'm just saying that the nature of them are not like that. It's kind of more on the left, internationalist, people walking alongside each other. And so there is nothing to warrant this kind of violence at all. And I don't believe that, chanting a slogan, no matter what you think, it's not up to the police to punish people for a slogan they think is illegal. It's up to to the court, where all of these cases don't reach the court. It's just an excuse. If the police really believed this was wrong, they would escalate it to courts, and courts would kind of find people guilty. But that doesn't happen. It's just an excuse. I haven't seen, for like, let's say 95% of the violence, because I can't be everywhere all the time, I haven't seen this kind of violence escalate. And also, what people do is they understand the police law. The police laws here are very repressive. You can't fight back. And most of what people do is just chain and stay there. And the police just punch into them. And you can see the videos. Like, even no matter how the length of the video is, police just running through the crowds. And you can see the guy punching the people with so much like vitriolic hate. So my experience is that it's not that way. It's not that way at all. I haven't seen anything of that sort.
And what about the role of the media? You already alluded to this, because I mean, they would like us to know, Bild-Zeitung would like us to know that the Islamists are again protesting, or the Hamas people are again protesting, and that they are all violent crowds and that they want to destroy everything. So what would be interesting is to know, like, how you think mainstream media, let's say, because there are many people like you that are also covering this independently, but mainstream media is there too, yes, right? They are also on the protests. They're also filming this stuff. So basically they should be seeing what you're seeing. So how do they react? Do you speak to them sometimes? Do you get an idea, like, what do they share the position of the police, the political position of the government, to say, yeah, let's crash these protests? Or are they actually saying, no, we should report on this and we should do something about it?
I have tried to interact several times, but then I quit. I was outside a protest. It was a HU sit-in, not the occupation, but a sit-in. And someone from RBB struck up a conversation. And when I started talking about covering things for real, says, I don't want to have the conversation. It feels that they're going in to spread a narrative, not to understand. And if you talk to any of these journalists, for example, they don't know anything about the region or the context. So someone was talking once about their experience of showing the pin of Shireen Abu Akleh, a journalist who was killed in Palestine. And he showed it to some of these journalists. They don't know who she is. How are they asking people to get their input? They don't do that. On the contrary, what they do is tend to provocate. There is one journalist from Bild, very well known. He's done a lot of dubious things. Like, I don't call it journalism.
Right,
he
right.
stole footage and credited himself with that, which is kind of like ethically dubious. He misrepresents what people say, and people don't want him there. But I want to talk about a different problem that happens, because people don't want to be slandered by these journalists. They don't want to talk to them.
Right.
So these journalists complain to the police, and the police always log their complaints about protesters not wanting to talk to them, or if you put your hand to the camera, that is kind of like a assault on the camera. The police are very biased. They only report the assaults on these people, but not on journalists like me. They would not. That kind of biased cooperation happens a lot, and we've seen it, for example, in a private event where they force their own journalists inside. But what is worse about all of the mainstream media is the German NGOs covering this. German NGOs do not look into the ethics of these journalists and what they do and how they abuse the protesters that they're interviewing and break ethics code. And even most recently, RSF Germany did the strangest thing ever. They issued a report that blames, that sees the danger to journalism as the anti-genocide protesters. They
Right.
framed it that way, and almost absolved the government of anything that happened. And
So now it becomes a legitimizing narrative to say, yeah, the police are actually intervening in the protests because the protests are what, hating the journalists or something, or against the journalists?
Attacking the journalists are very dangerous for journalists. Of course, if you're a journalist doing your job, no one does anything to you. But if you're going out and have like cases of slander, libel, and misrepresentation, people don't want to be misrepresented. So it goes into a cycle.
And then raising your hand in front of the camera might already be an assault to the journalistic rights.
And also like not wanting in one of the recent protests, you're allowed to have like you know, umbrellas or kofiyas or so on, but the police suddenly banned it and arrested someone for having their kofiya up because they're saying they're hindering the press, but only certain kind of press. It happened with me one of the days. I was not allowed in, even though I had a press card, and it was extremely discriminatory. But what I'm trying to say is that the narrative of the state is adopted by civil society, and that gives it some kind of legitimacy. And when you look on the ground, it's not real. And these, you know, and we've seen NGOs do this in Egypt, where they cater to the state. It's just so shocking to me when international organizations have their German chapters doing such a horrible job covering what is happening in Germany, as if Germany cannot be a repressive state. It's kind of a mentality that strikes me as extremely terrible and worse than what we see in Egypt.
And there are journalists like yourself that are at least not swimming in this state-sponsored narrative, let's say, and they actually do get assaulted, like yourself. You were assaulted last time. So I'm wondering, is that maybe then something? I mean, you know, the journalists sometimes they speak about their ethics code, and you know, we should support each other, and it's bad that journalists are getting hurt there. Like, are they then at least speaking up? Like, what happens if you get beaten up by a cop and there is another RBB guy standing next to you? Is he saying something in order to defend you or anything?
Oh, that reminds me of something that happened the last protest. So I was pushed around several times, but one time was extremely difficult, and the cop really unnecessarily pushed me really hard. And I said, "Assault! I want to report this guy." So I find a hand on my shoulder from one of those German Reuters journalists telling me, no, that's not assault. That's their job. I said, their job is to assault journalists and people? And he said, yes. And I was like, okay, so that's the mentality. But to be honest, forget what's happening in Berlin. Over 200 journalists have been targeted and killed in Palestine.
Sure.
And what is German media and journalists doing? The mainstream ones are so ideological, the others are afraid to speak out. And there is a culture of fear. And I know journalists who tell me they cannot dare speak out, otherwise they'll lose their jobs. Sure. So it's a climate of fear and intimidation. And even when journalists are attacked, as you can see, the mentality is, yeah, let's just make excuses for the state and the police.
Okay, where do you see this going? Like, do you have like some kind of idea? Like, because you're still on it. Will it just be more of the same? Do you see some change happening, maybe in society, something moving, or?
Well, first, I mean, it's a race. I think people are learning that propaganda is there and that they're resisting it. But it's a race because they have all the resources. On the 1st of May, I was very surprised at how the presence of pro-Palestinian movements dispersed throughout the protests, unlike the year before where they were contained to one block. Somehow, despite all of this mainstream media kind of distortion, people are not buying it, and it's still, there's small changes that in society. But I don't think it's quick enough. I think we're on my honest opinion is that we're on a pathway to fascism, where all parties get aligned. At least for now, it's fascism against Palestine, where there's only one party, there's only one paper, there's only one one set of executive body and oversight, and they're all against Palestine. I don't know if it's going to be infectious to other topics with the rise of the right and the AfD and the CDU, but for me, there's not enough resistance to stop it, even though the resistance is kind of growing to these kind of oppressive measures.
Yeah. And in the end also, like, question is really like what the resistance, even if it were to grow, what it would face, because ultimately that repression is probably also just a top of the iceberg, basically what's possible. So yeah, in the end, if that became, let's say, a movement that is more significant, maybe even shuts down things, strikes, blockades of harbors or stuff like that, we probably even see much more harder repression on them. So yeah.
I mean, the German state has a potential for repression that is dormant, and we're only seeing like you said, the tip of the iceberg, because once it's activated, they have an arsenal of tools and laws that people are unaware of that could be used against people. And the more the resistance, the more this happens. And there's so many like abuses of little laws that don't make any sense, that loopholes where, for example, a cop can say that you've insulted them and arrest you. They can make up this resistance charge. They can make up things that take a lot of energy from people resisting and can escalate. So yeah, we don't know yet, but in any case, it's better to have more resistance than just give into these practices without a fight.
Okay. In that matter, you'll probably continue your work of covering that. So everybody should follow him on Instagram, Wael Eskander. Maybe we'll post your Instagram link below in the comments so people can follow you. And anything else where one can follow you? Some writings where you write periodically or something like this, or?
Yeah, I have a Substack as well.
Substack, okay.
Yeah,
we'll link the Substack also. I thought so. Okay, well, thanks for coming. Thanks for sharing your experiences. And let's stay in touch. Maybe we'll talk about some new developments soon.
Thanks for having me.
Sure, anytime.
Leute, wir brauchen eure Hilfe. Wenn euch dieses Video gefallen hat, klickt auf Like, abonniert den Kanal und vergesst nicht das Glöckchen zu drücken, damit ihr benachrichtigt werdet, wenn wir neuen Content droppen.
Außerdem solltet ihr uns überall folgen, wo wir verfügbar sind. Das ist Facebook, Instagram, Twitter und Twitch. Und wenn wir irgendwelche Ankündigungen machen oder Posts, dann shared, was das Zeug hält. Gebt uns all eure Liebe.
Wir haben mittlerweile ziemlich signifikante Kosten. Wenn ihr es euch irgendwie leisten könnt, unterstützt uns doch auf Patreon. Dann kommt ihr auch in den Genuss verschiedener Vorteile, wie zum Beispiel Zugang zu unserer Discord-Community oder Zugang zu den ultra-geheimen Patreon-Episoden, die wir dort posten. Außerdem könnt ihr uns natürlich auch über PayPal Spenden zukommen lassen.
Außerdem haben wir mittlerweile einen eigenen Online-Shop. Das heißt, wenn ihr euch immer noch fragt, was ihr euren Lieben zu Weihnachten, Ostern oder sonst wie schenken könnt, geht dorthin und kauft duftes Merch.
Alle Links dazu hier in der Beschreibung oder auch auf unserer Webseite 99zu1.de.
Vielen Dank fürs Dabeisein, danke für die Unterstützung und wir sehen uns in diesem Theater.